what it's like to be an entrepreneur, the ups and downs of it. Because I think there are a lot of people who are currently in the classroom, and I've had people DM me and reach out to me about like what is it like to transition into the space, whether it's consulting or just pure content creating around education. What are some of the lessons that you've learned in your own journey that could be applied to others? So that's something that's come up pretty regularly over the past few weeks for me. And I've actually gone through some reflecting on my own, because there's dry months and there's some really wet ones. So
Hey, this is Jake Small, author of For Every Black Boy, and you're listening to Ed Up Accelerated Excellence.
This episode of Ed Up Accelerated Excellence is supported by the 2.0 conferences to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, April 7th through 9th, 2026. Business leaders, educators, healthcare experts, marketing and tech professionals, and founding entrepreneurs are welcome to take part. Reserve your space today and receive a 15% discount courtesy of Ed Up Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE15OFF. That's EDUPXE15 off. Check the show notes for more information or learn more and register online at the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUPXE15OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation, or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Accelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. Welcome to Ed Up Accelerated Excellence, the podcast for the advancement of educational excellence and equity. I'm your host, Jacob Easley, the second PhD PMP, and today's guest is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. He is the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, a global educational consulting firm, author of the book Learning to Relearn, and creator of the podcast by the same name, Identity Talk. So, Kwame, welcome to the show and our series on the impact of media and marketing, in particular in education. Would you introduce yourself to the Ed Up Accelerated Excellence community, giving voice to your name, and just tell us a bit about what's in your sphere at this moment?
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for having me on. For those who are listening, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I am here as an 18-year educator. Can't believe it's been 18 years since I've been doing this. I know I don't look it, but trust me, the gray hairs are starting to come in. I started my career as a middle school math teacher in Philadelphia. Did that for 5 years, and then eventually moved to Boston for another 5. And now I'm here abroad with my family and have been for the past 6 years, where I've worked as a freelance education consultant through my firm, Identity Talk Consulting, which has had the privilege of working with more than 35 different schools, districts, and organizations over the past 6 years. And in Identity Talk, we cover the 3 pillars. So that's identity affirming education, culturally responsive teaching, and anti-bias, anti-racist practices. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm certain that you're going to learn a lot more by the end of this conversation.
Yeah, so we are happy to have you here. I have to say, gray hair, I have them too, is really a sign of wisdom because, there are children that have gray hair. So,
right.
And we usually say, what do we usually say? Oh, that's an old spirit. So you talked about this world. Philly, give a shout out to Philly. You were in Philly, but when did you first find your passion for education? And tell us about a few experiences throughout your trajectory that supported or helped to reaffirm that passion.
Yeah, there are many moments that led to this path. First and foremost, it all starts at home. Coming from a home with 2 parents who were born and raised in Ghana, in West Africa, and they moved to the States in the late 60s, right after high school, and started a family and a new life. That's something that played a huge part in my identity. And then just the early part of my K-12 schooling, I started out with an IEP. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to speak acronyms for my non-educators. Individual education plan. So basically a learning support plan for students who have either special needs or have disabilities. So I was that student for my first 4 or 5 grades of my K-12 schooling. And yes, I'm neurodiverse, which is a part of who I am. So being in a setting where you are experiencing ridicule from peers, you're getting teased for being in a different class from everybody else, riding a different bus from everybody else, and hearing the perceptions about how unintelligent people think you are. These were things that I had experienced as a child. So that was a part of my education journey that has shaped who I am as an educator. And then spending 3 years in Ghana, living with my father and going to school out there and experiencing what it's like to be in the Ghanaian school system and how the inequities were very much prevalent during the time that I was there. To be in a space where you got to buy all your books, you got to pay for your school fees, you got to find your own transportation. This was Ghana. Compared to being in the States where taxpayers are paying for your free reduced lunch. Taxpayers are paying to ensure that you have books in your school. Taxpayers are ensuring that your school has furniture and other facilities. It's not coming out of your pocket unless you're going to a special school like a magnet school or a private school. If you're talking regular public school, like where I attended and where I taught, that's taxpayers' money. So to see the inequities there, that was an eye-opener. And then just go through the different stages of being in predominantly white spaces, particularly in high school, where I had to navigate that space and try to find who I was. And then eventually get into college where I started to work with children. First off, working in volunteer programs on campus at Temple University. Shout out to Temple, go Owls. And then working at the local YMCA, which is about a 5-minute walk from Temple's campus. And I was working at the after-school program where I was tutoring, I was mentoring, and just working with young people throughout the Philly area. And it was during that time where I really started to develop a love for working with children. And it was something that carried over after I finished my undergrad at Temple. And I eventually took an opportunity with an AmeriCorps program called Education Works, which is basically like other AmeriCorps programs like City Year, for example, where you might do a 1 to 2 year service. And in this case, I was working at a Title I school in North Philly. And I was doing everything from assisting teachers, monitoring recess and lunch, working the after school program. So I'm logging 50 plus hours every single week, only to earn a stipend, a government stipend that was probably barely over $200 biweekly. So it wasn't anything at all. But I did it for a year and a half because I was so passionate about working with young people. And those were some of the best years of my life, believe it or not. Even though I didn't have a bed to my name, I was splitting a rent with 2 other roommates from college and doing what you can to survive. You know, it felt like good times sometimes, you know?
Right.
Not just surviving. Like, that was literally what I was doing during those years. But I learned some very important lessons too. And I think that grit, that determination, those intangibles have allowed me to have longevity in this education space, from being a math teacher to now being a consultant and a content creator and an author and all these other roles that I've embraced over the recent years.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, you really highlight, and you brought back to my mind my first job in LaGrange, Georgia, after graduating from Morehouse and going to teach. My salary was so low, very low. However, I mean, there was so much learning as a new teacher about the structures of schools, the systems, and how we support students, not only learning the curriculum that you have to teach, but then how to augment it and how to, you know, shape the curriculum in a way that really supports your students and connects with them. But passion sort of drives it. It's not really the money. So I definitely understand how you're saying, being in that good times moment, like the television show. We don't have much money, but we have each other, and we have this drive and this passion and this spirit that keeps us going. So, and community.
You look, we got them.
Good times. Yeah, and the community as well. So let's talk about identity talk. So you have there's sort of 2 ideas around this. One is your consultancy, and one is a content creator work for the podcast. So let's first talk about consultancy, and because I want to focus on media and marketing, we'll talk about the podcast. But making that transition from educator to entrepreneur, and I'm not saying it's a clean break because they probably overlap. What was the impetus? What have you learned so far? And what are those nuggets that you can share with folks who might be in the classroom or supporting classrooms in educational spaces and are deciding to think about how to expand the reach? And I'm really shying away from saying monetize, but really the reach of services for high quality education and educational impact.
Absolutely. And believe it or not, I didn't pre-plan this move. This was something that happened by accident. And it was a series of epiphanies that led to where I am. So it actually started in 2017. My wife had just given birth to our first son, and I was on paternity leave for 3 months. So between changing diapers and learning how to be a new father, I decided, hey, I want to write a book. So the journey started with a book. And this is actually my firstborn right here, called Shaping the Teacher Identity, 8 Lessons That Help Define the Teacher in You. This was a book that was a grassroots effort, self-published, and I was learning how to be a writer during that time. And honestly, I wrote the book because I was around friends who had published books, and I saw the amount of work that he put into it. I mean, from the book launch to the whole writing process. And I said, this is really cool. I think I might want to do this. And I had the time and the energy. Why not? Or maybe not the energy, but definitely the time. Because, being a first-time father, you're not getting much sleep, but you find pockets of time to write. And I certainly was able to do that because I wasn't going anywhere. I was pretty much confined in my home, trying to just adjust to this new lifestyle. But I wrote a manuscript, which took the 3 months I was there. And by the time I finished writing, it was time for me to go back to school. So by the time I was done, the book was pretty much done as far as the writing was concerned, the manuscript. So the remaining months was really focused on fine-tuning language, editing, tweaking, and eventually I was able to publish my first book, Shape the Teacher Identity, in late 2018. So once that book comes out, now I'm selling it to my first buyers, who are my colleagues at the school I was at in Boston at the time. And they're loving the book. They're telling me all these great things about it. And a friend of mine was letting me know, hey, yeah, you think you're done with this journey, but you have to understand, the minute you publish a book about content that's within your specialty, you are now considered an expert on said content. So therefore, you have to figure out ways to repurpose that content, whether it's in the form of workshops, whether it's in the form of lectures, or some other ways to disseminate this content. So I took that advice to heart, and I decided, hey, I could really create a series of workshops around the different chapters in the book. So my first few PD engagements and presentations were around things from the book. So that was my foundation. That was my ground. So I started to go to different neighboring school districts and was doing pro bono presentations for schools, for districts. And this was on my time off. So I would take time off of my full-time job as a teacher at my school to go and present at these other schools, which I was not supposed to do, but I found a way to get out of it, right? So it started with that. It started with going to different colleges to speak with pre-service teachers about teaching and the things that I learned as a young teacher that I wanted to pass down to them. And after a while, with the work piling up, I had people inquiring about how much my services were. Like, how much do you charge for this workshop? And I didn't have that concept of business at that time. I mean, how many educators really do? Most of us, we just love doing what we do. We're not thinking about monetizing. So I said, all right, because I'm getting so many inquiries, I need to formalize what I'm doing. So that's when I decided to form the LLC, which is Identity Talk Consulting. And from there, that's when I started to understand the concept of monetization. I know we're not going to talk about it, but just to frame it for folks who are listening, that's when it all started for me.
Yeah, that's interesting how life takes you down this journey. And I can just imagine you have this new baby, but the ideas are already there and the endorphins that kick in. I know you were just dead tired at some points, but this joy that sort of fills you, I'm sure that had a big influence in thinking about this new baby that you have, what you've learned in education, and ultimately how your work might shape the work of folks who are going to be teaching your son one day.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting about that time was I still very much wanted to be in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't one of those instances where, oh, I published a book, I'm getting some buzz from it, I want to make the transition out of the classroom. I still wanted to be in the classroom. But then what happened was my wife ended up getting a great opportunity with the U.S. Peace Corps. So 2 months later, we're packing our bags with the family and moving all the way to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia for my wife's job.
Mm-hmm.
So it was at that time where I really had to learn the art of pivoting, because this was an LLC that was only 2 months old. I was building a lot of momentum. And then now I'm moving away from where all my potential clientele is. And I'm essentially having to figure out life in this new place in Addis Ababa. So, yeah, during that time, I was trying to look for a job in an international school. That was the goal. And Identity Talk was going to be the side hustle. That was the plan B, right? The secondary plan. But then I found it difficult to gain ground in that setting. So as a result of not being able to obtain work, I then had to shift my focus to Identity Talk full time. Wasn't quite sure what that was going to look like, but I knew that I could podcast. I didn't know what a podcast was, but I was seeing all these cool people on social media who are filming themselves in the classroom, talking about the cool things they were doing, giving us clips of them teaching in live action. And I said, man, I want to do something like that. That's cool. Let me get up in this. So that's how it turned out for me in terms of the podcast. Like, I started to reach out to people, do cold emails on social media. I said, hey, what you're doing looks cool. You want to come on Zoom and talk about yourself for an hour and I record you? And they're like, yeah, of course, for free. And it started December 2019. I started my podcast, Identity Talk Consulting, Identity Talk for Educators Live. It started there, and I've been fortunate enough to interview more than 200 educators over the course of these 5.5 years. And there's a lot more I could say about that, but I'll pause there for right now.
So over 200 educators have engaged on Identity Talk, but I think there are a couple of things that you speak to that I actually want to underscore. So one is getting started, just getting started. Because you mentioned I didn't know much about a podcast. I saw it, but let me jump into this. But also this marvel of being able to pivot and what pivoting means. And I think pivoting is part of resiliency.
Yes.
Here you are in a new international context trying to translate what you were doing in the States, even though you've already had experiences internationally, but not necessarily as an entrepreneur, educator / entrepreneur. And then shifting that focus and how you engage with folks in a different environment. So kudos to you, my friend.
Thank you for listening to EdUp Accelerated Excellence. This episode is supported by the 2.0 conferences to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, April 7th through 9th, 2026. Business leaders, educators, healthcare experts, marketing and tech professionals, and founding entrepreneurs are welcome to take part. Reserve your space today and receive a 15% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE15OFF. That's EdUpXE15OFF. Check out the details in the show notes or learn more and register online at the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUPXE15OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Accelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. So we're speaking with Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, who is the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, a global educational consulting firm, and author of the book Learning to Relearn. So, Kwame, how did the concept of identity talk come about, and what are the special ingredients from your vantage point that make the podcast a special sauce that brings listeners back again and again for a nourishing taste?
Wow, what an incredible question. And I love the food metaphor used there. All right, let's start with the origin of identity talk. So, I don't know if people can really see my shirt, but Identity Talk's tagline is stay true to the teacher in you. So where does Identity Talk come from in this tagline? It goes back to the first book. The book was the foundation. So the name of the book was Shaping the Teacher Identity, 8 Lessons that Help Define the Teacher in You. So I literally just took words from the title, remixed it, and that's how Identity Talk came to be. Now, as far as what Identity Talk means, for me, if you break it down by each of the words, the talk is something that can be internal, the messages that you say to yourself about who you are as an educator, but it's also external. It's what you say to the public and how you show up through your words, through your actions as an educator. So that's the talk part, right? And also with talking, it reinforces the idea of us teachers as being reflective practitioners. When we reflect, we gotta be able to talk things through. We gotta analyze. We gotta diagnose. We gotta figure out what went wrong here. What can we do better? How can we enhance our craft? So that's the talk part. Identity, you can look at it from different angles. I think in the beginning of this journey, when I said identity, it was more around identity as a teacher, like professional identity as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
What's your teaching philosophy, right? How do your life experiences manifest, or shape the way that you go about interacting with students or teaching your students? So the identity was more about the professional side of it. But as time has gone on and I've delved more into the more expansive view of identity, which does include intersectionality, which does include culture, which does include all these other identity markers, right? Now it's more about the whole person, the whole human, and how that manifests itself in your art as a teacher. So that's essentially what Identity Talk is about. And then staying true to the teacher in you, that's basically meaning that you are staying true to your morals, you're staying true to your principles, irrespective of what's happening around you. For example, our current socio-political climate. There's a lot of things that are going on that don't need to be said. People know what it is. But even with all the censoring and all the radical changes in legislation, you still are, as some people may say, you're still standing in your square. You are still staying true. You're still showing up. You are still being authentic in who you are in order to do what's best for your students. That's what it means to stay true to the teacher in you. And that's the mantra that I carry into everything that I do, including the podcast. When people come on at Daytime Educators Live, it's a virtual affinity space. That's what it's evolved into. It's a space where mostly people from strongly marginalized communities, so Black and brown people, LGBTQIA plus people, neurodiverse people, people from those communities, they come and they're able to share their stories. They're able to be vulnerable. They're able to come to a space where no one's going to interrupt them. No one's going to question or interrogate who they are. And they could just simply be. They can simply be themselves. And that's not something that they can do within their own school communities. So to come to a space where you have a host in myself who's simply and genuinely interested in how you came to become an educator and how your unique life experiences have led you to this space. That's something that people don't get the opportunity to do in their own communities, right? So I believe that's the essence of the podcast, Identity Talk for Educators Live, is the fact that we're able to bring these brilliant educator minds, and they're in a space of vulnerability. They're in a space of transparency, a space of honesty, radical honesty that they've never visited before, most of them. So that's what I would say about the podcast.
Well, speaking of how you just defined it, a safe space and bringing together brilliant minds, yourself included, here you are on this podcast. So we appreciate that. I think this speaks to this notion of reflection. I like to use the word dialogic inquiry, and I think I've used that on the show before. Talk, whether it's internal talk or communal talk about one's thinking about ideas, but also thinking about self. And so I think that's powerful. So I can see this definitely being a resource, Identity Talk, the podcast. But you talk about this radical honesty and being true to yourself. What advice will you give to folks when they're in environments where what we're professing, or what you profess on the show, being true to oneself, does not align with the social, political context of that particular environment?
For those who may be in that situation, I don't know if there's a clean answer to this question because there's a lot of things going on. But the one thing I will say is you have to follow your conscience, right? You know what's best for your students. You're in that classroom every single day, building with those students, having positive relations with those students, teaching them, molding them, nurturing them. There's no one outside their parents who knows those students better than you. So in a situation that we're in right now, you gotta lean on your gut. You gotta lean on your experience and what you know is best. And that means sometimes you gotta speak out. Professionally, of course. But you may not be in a situation where you can easily do that, because the reality is this: some states are unionized, some are not. And if you're in a state that's not unionized, what you say could lead to ultimate termination. Or you could be suspended for an extended period of time, depending on where you are. So that's what deters people from speaking up. But then you got to think about yourself. You got to prioritize yourself. Do I want to continue to be in a space where I can't fully be myself and I can't do what is best for my students? And you also have to remind yourself that education is something that happens beyond the brick and mortar. It doesn't just happen in a school. Education happens everywhere. Right now, you and I are having a conversation. This is a form of education for those who are listening. We're not in a classroom. We're not in a school. We're in a virtual space having an intellectual conversation for people to listen to and for people to learn from. So when we understand that we can educate students everywhere else in the world, and that elected officials don't have jurisdiction over where we teach outside of the classroom space or school space, then that helps us to reframe our mind as to how we can go about doing what we love to do and still meeting the mark with our students. And there are many ways in which people are doing that right now, many examples, right? The podcast is one thing, but yeah, people who are doing TikTok videos. Yeah, people who have started their own LLCs. They've started nonprofits. You have people who have created spaces on different social media platforms where their students may come on and talk. That is with parental, with permission from parents.
Yeah, definitely.
But these are things that are happening. And sometimes it may lead to you deciding this ain't it. I need to step out of this space in order to preserve my own social emotional well-being. But let's say it's someone that wants to remain in the space. You can still be that person. You just gotta know how to navigate the respective spaces you're in so that you can still have a job at the end of the day. You also gotta know what your rights are. So if you're a teacher, you should know your school's handbook. That is your ammunition. And I say this because that's what principals use. That's what the district uses when they're determining whether or not they should give you a consequence. They go by the book. So why not you? If you know what the guidelines are, if you know what the bylaws are, if you know what the policies and protocols are, you're already ahead of the game. You're already giving yourself an opportunity or an advantage to do this work in a way that maintains your authenticity and your integrity as an educator, while also staying within the confines of your professional responsibilities as an employee within that school or district.
So that's really good advice. And we're going to follow through with this idea of being true to oneself or being one's authentic self. So how does identity function as a vehicle for educational excellence and equity?
I think with identity, just from a fundamental standpoint, the way that we view education stems from our experiences as students. For some of us, maybe we're in this space because we had the worst teacher in the world who gave us hell. And we said, nah, we don't want to be like that teacher. I want to be a different teacher than this person. So therefore, I'm going to become an educator. That's how some of us got into the space. For others, it may be a more positive tale where you want to emulate what your favorite teacher did when you were a kid, and you want to carry on that legacy in your own way as a teacher. So that's what gets you into the profession. So I think first and foremost, it starts with our story. I truly believe that our story drives the way that we view education. It gives us a lens through which we can look at some of the most pertinent issues that impact our system. And if we're able to own that narrative, if we're able to lean into that story, that's what helps us maintain our authenticity and our integrity as teachers. If I'm talking about myself, the reason why I feel like I've been a pretty good educator and advocate for it is because I always stay true to who I am. And I know my story. I know how I got here. I know what it was like to be neurodiverse. I know what it's like to have an IEP. I know what it's like to live in a foreign country and have to adjust to new life there. I know what it's like to be one of the few Black boys in a predominantly white space. I know what it's like to be one of the few Black male teachers, or the only Black male teacher, or the only Black teacher in a space where the faculty is predominantly white. I know what that feels like. That was my story for many of the years that I was teaching in the classroom. So when I think about these different, I gotta mention this. I know what it's like to be a first generation immigrant in the United States and how people view you. all these experiences have helped me in some shape or form to be the educator that I am today. Whenever I'm in certain situations with students or with faculty, I always go back to my story. What are some parts of my story that can be applicable to this situation? How can I draw from those experiences in order to yield certain outcomes? So when it comes to identity, identity is everything. Identity is how we make executive decisions on how we decide to navigate the society that we're in. We lead with that identity piece. And we have to continue to do that, especially if we don't want other people to define who we are to the core.
So as you were talking, it made me think about this idea, particularly of what it means to be seen or defined as other in that environment. And it tracks back to this idea when you're talking about identity for public good, which is going into schools to really help students and communities, is that being otherized helps you to, I guess it helps to internalize or strengthen one's sense of empathy for others, particularly when you're in spaces where you're trying to do good. So as if you think about this, and so the contrast to that are folks who find themselves in very few, if any, spaces where they are otherized. Can you imagine the empathy work that is, and I'm theorizing here, so I haven't tested this. It's maybe a bit more difficult, and it's hard to sort of see things through the lens of others when you have not yourself been otherized. Thank you for tuning in to EdUp Accelerated Excellence with our guest, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. When we return, Kwame responds to this thought and shares more about his podcast, Identity Talk, his book, Learning to Relearn, and the role of identity in the making of educational excellence and equity. Tune in 1 week for part 2 of this episode.
Thank you for engaging with EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a member of the EdUp Experience Network of educational podcasts. You can find this and other episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Radio, and other outlets where you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow us and share within your network. To leave a comment or suggest a guest, contact us online at edupxe.com.